To Slavoj Žižek and Jacques Lacan. The useless precaution is available for exactly one more day. This is the final day that you can still purchase this ebook, exclusively available on my Patreon. The ebook summarizes the 12 lectures that I taught of the same name, and if you'd like to read the ebook and support this community, please head over to www.patreon.com/Jeneline and Julian. Just a reminder that there are 24 hours remaining to download that ebook. And if you become a patron today, you will also be able to download the following upcoming ebook, which is going to be called Sisyphus in Love, based on the previous lecture series. So, just a quick plug, a quick reminder that you can still find my ebook, The Useless Precaution, a 100-page introduction to the idea that you should enjoy your symptom, and Slavoj Žižek's philosophy, Lacanian psychoanalysis. You can find that exclusively on my Patreon. That is www.patreon.com/Jeneline and Julian. All right, hello everybody. Hello on YouTube, hi. Hello on Instagram. I am so glad that you could join us this morning. I know that there are currently significant outages going on Instagram, so if you are with us this morning, consider yourself amongst the lucky few who have retained the use of their account. I see some celebratory comments about Lula. Yes, absolutely. This is wonderful news. And greetings to everybody in Brazil. I hope that you have a hopeful, optimistic mindset this morning. Absolutely. Greetings to Brazil. The entire world cheers for you. We're going to be hosting, or I'm going to be hosting, I should say, if you haven't joined us before, a 45-minute Introduction to Philosophy and Theory lecture. This is a weekly Monday morning session that I've been hosting for the past 2 years. And my goal is to provide you with a hopefully entertaining and enriching introduction to some of the key concepts within continental philosophy and Freudian Lacanian psychoanalysis. However, you don't need to have any background in any of these theories whatsoever. If this is your absolute starting point, then you are welcome here. I really try to introduce these things in a way that can hopefully make sense to everybody, without dumbing them down. That is the goal of this project, to elevate the tone and yet to make it accessible to everyone. Now, as per usual, if you really want to do me a favor, I would love to hear where you're joining me from. That is genuinely the biggest gift you can give me, hearing where you guys join me from around the world. The fact that we have a global learning community with people tuning in for a Monday morning, 8 a.m. philosophy session makes me so incredibly happy. I see someone from Malaysia. Greetings to Malaysia. That's absolutely amazing. Amsterdam. Goedemorgen Amsterdam. Salem, Oregon. That's actually not too far away. Bulgaria. Guten Morgen Deutschland. I see Peru, Los Angeles, the Bay Area. I want to go to the Bay Area pretty soon when it starts getting cold. Hello, Cali. Hello, Pakistan. Hello, India. Hello, Canada. Hello, Singapore. This is incredible. Thank you. Thank you guys so much. Hello, Romania. Hello, India. Hello, North Carolina. I am a literal penguin from Antarctica. Hello. I'm so glad you're here. Sweden, Peru. This is beautiful, guys. This is really, really special and precious. Thank you so much. I think that if you're interested in thought and ideas and philosophy and art and poetry and literature and cinema, as I am, then the best feeling in the world is to be able to share that passion with other people. And there's so many times in my life where I feel alone in my passion for those things. And knowing that every Monday morning we can touch base together and share that enthusiasm truly makes me happy. So thank you guys so much for giving me the gift of letting me know where you are. That is truly special. Okay, so we're going to be launching right in today. I'm going to be talking about the new app, or relatively new app, BeReal. I'm going to be talking about authenticity and the philosophy of authenticity, perhaps even the critique of authenticity. Along the way, I also want to talk about the moralization of politics. I'm going to talk about Slavoj Žižek's take on postmodernism. Perhaps if we have time, also Slavoj Žižek's opposition to Jordan Peterson, who you may also have heard of. And perhaps if we have time, we can also talk about the Lacanian theory of surplus enjoyment and think about how it relates to the idea of authenticity. So it's going to be a pretty wild ride. Make yourself comfortable. We're going to be here for about, 45 minutes. Jeneline has reminded me to actually try to be on time because as the editor of these lectures, she noted that the previous lecture went an hour and 15 minutes, which is too long by any standard. So I have a little clock here. Yes, and as I said before, my ebook, The Useless Precaution, is available for 24 more hours, for one more day. So if you'd like to download that ebook, get it now, because I'm going to delete it on November 1st. November 1st, that book will disappear into the ether and will be replaced by the next book, which is going to be called Sisyphus in Love. Now, if you'd like to download both of those books for the price of one, you can simply sign up today and you will be able to get both of those books. Today, The Useless Precaution, and on November 1st, which I guess is 2 days from now, you'll be able to get Sisyphus in Love. If you didn't know already, it's basically an ebook subscription service where every 3 months after I wrap up a lecture series, I produce an ebook version of those lectures, which is usually condensed to about 100 pages so that you have an easy to read summary of everything that we've talked about in the previous 12 weeks of these live streams. And so if you'd like to get that ebook, I know I'm doing a lot of plugs, but it is literally the last day you can get it. Please go to www.patreon.com/Jeneline and Julian. Okay, so let's begin. Recently, within the last couple of years, the app BeReal has become hugely popular, and I myself am amongst its users. And I'm frequently asked by people, don't you find BeReal to be a very oppressive app? Why would you allow yourself to be monitored by a company and told what to do, as it were? In other words, the idea that BeReal is an imposition on my freedom. After all, the basic premise of BeReal, for those who are not users of it, is that it will send you a daily prompt once a day, essentially telling you to post a picture of your whereabouts. And that if you do so, if you comply with this prompt, that you will then be allowed to see all the posts of your friends, the people that you follow. Now, what this means essentially is that your engagement with the app is conditional upon your participation by producing content. That rather than simply being the passive observer of other people's content, you have to produce content at any given moment in order to see the content of other users. Granted, there are some workarounds. You are allowed to post late, and the app will in fact punish you by showing other users that you have not properly followed orders, that you have posted late. But yes, you don't have to immediately post your whereabouts. Although everybody does enjoy seeing the occasional bathroom picture of somebody who was caught unawares. So in a nutshell, the premise of BeReal, as it works in the title, is thereby an imperative, right? Be real. Users will say to themselves, it is time to be real. And this imperative, the imperative for authenticity, is what I want to talk about in this lecture. And I'm going to relate it to Zizek's critique of the idea of subjectivity, the idea of postmodernism, and also the idea of the symptom in Lacanian surplus enjoyment. Now, if you think about it, before we say anything else, there's basically two responses that I've seen to be real. One of them is, how could you possibly use this oppressive app? How could you make yourself the mindless agent of some algorithm that tells you and dictates to you when to produce content for it? Is this not the panopticon whereby we are simply observing each other, checking in on each other to make sure about each other's whereabouts? And certainly there's an element of that. The app, by means of prompting us overtly to participate, thereby makes us instinctually aware of the fact that we are, in a sense, not the free agents of our own production. And then the other approach to that, which is my approach, is to not condemn the app, but to see the app as symptomatic to the broader culture of social media participation. Now, what do I mean when I say that BeReal is symptomatic? Think about it. BeReal wouldn't make sense outside of Instagram. It wouldn't make sense outside of YouTube and TikTok. BeReal by itself would be an empty proposition. After all, the idea of being real relies on the a priori assumption that we are not real. And that the app is, in a sense, identifying a pain point, the pain point of alienation, and promising us some relief in the form of the app. You feel unreal, and through this app, you can be real. You thought you had genuine connections with others through social media, which you don't. Here's an app that will provide you with it. Of course, here we have the classic proposition within all capitalist consumption, which is that the solution to the problem is more of what created the problem. Instead of saying you feel alienated and inauthentic, get off your phone, the answer is you feel alienated and inauthentic, why not use another app? And so here we have a continuation of the problem. This is something that we always find within the consumer drive. Namely that the solution to a problem certainly cannot be to do less of the thing that caused the problem, but simply to do it better, to do it differently. And so the imperative be real thereby points towards an unacknowledged, perhaps, feeling that we are not real, that we have become alienated and detached from our own reality, from our own selves, a byproduct of being on the internet up to, I don't know what your phones tell you, but for me it can be up to 8 hours a day, sometimes even 10 hours a day, which is a frightful thing to think that you are spending that amount of time on your phone. And so BeReal presents itself as a solution to a problem, which of course thereby perpetuates the problem. And yet, there is an underlying element here. Namely, what does it mean to be real? What does it mean to be real or authentic on the internet? After all, BeReal, even if it were to make good on its promises of providing you with an authentic outreach towards others, would thereby essentially be making you perform authenticity. Which leads to the question, can authenticity be real without being performed? Or to put it differently, is authenticity still authentic if it relies on being performed? Now, the Hegelian answer to this actually is that the ultimate illusion would be the idea of authenticity an sich, a priori. That the paradox and the problem of authenticity is that it precisely has to be performed towards others. This is something that Sartre was already aware of when he wrote famously about the gaze, that when you look at others, you become aware of yourself being looked at. And Lacan, the French psychoanalyst, simply takes this a step further and says, you are your own gaze. You are simply the gaze embodied. You are not performing for the gaze, you identify as the gaze. And here we can actually see a difference between Foucault and Hegel, something that Zizek already pointed out, that Foucault talked about the soul as being the trap of the body, that the body is performed, that the body is constrained by what he called power structures and discourses. And yet the Hegelian perspective is almost exactly the other way around. It's to say that the soul is trapped by the body and can be liberated by power structures and discourses. In other words, it depends on whether or not you see these power structures as being oppressive, or if you see them actually as being the agent of subjectivity as such. In other words, are you real before BeReal, or does BeReal allow you or grant you authenticity? Of course, it's never so simple, right? To go back to Lacan versus Sartre, Sartre thereby argues that the problem of yourself is thereby being aware that you are simply the creation of others, that you exist for others, and you have to learn to exist for yourself. The famous Sartrean expression is that the central premise of existentialism is not just what you do, but what you do with what others have done to you. And for Sartre, this is a founding gesture of all existence. After all, when you are born, something has been done to you. You've been launched into the Heideggerian Dasein. This is also the Heideggerian concept of Verworfenheit, that you are thrown into life, that you don't simply start. That in a strange sense, the starting gun of the race of life has already been shot and you are still standing at the starting line. To paraphrase a line from, I don't know what it is, Pink Floyd or Fleetwood Mac. And this problem of existing for others and somehow having to exist for yourself is thereby central to the existentialist dilemma, which is, if you realize that there is no such thing as an authentic self, then this surely means that you have to create a self. And thereby authenticity doesn't become the starting point of experience. Authenticity becomes the end goal, the thing that you're trying to achieve. And here Lacan has a really interesting idea, which he calls the difference between the goal and the aim. Lacan says that secretly, usually our goal and our aim don't align, that they can be antithetical. For example, think about, again, BeReal in response to other social media apps. BeReal presents itself as a problem to the problem of alienation and inauthenticity on social media. However, the real aim isn't to cure those problems, but simply to sustain those problems in a manner that is less alienating or more enjoyable to you, to find another twist on it. You could also see this in terms of a television series, where the goal is to watch the entire show, and yet your aim is to simply enjoy the same episode over and over again in slightly different variations. It's also why it can be devastating to reach the end of a book or the end of a television series. You simply have to start over again, pretending as if the same book thereby is the sequel to that which you have just read. It's also why we live in spin-off and prequel culture, where we cannot cope with the traumatic encounter with the end of something that we have loved, that we have to stretch out this enjoyment into infinite variations until the thing that we loved and cherished as a child has truly and well become destroyed from within. It's like that beautiful quote from Bilbo in The Hobbit where he says that he feels like butter stretched over too much bread. And so the problem of authenticity is thereby that the idea of authenticity, which is supposed to be the truth of your own nature to yourself, is directly tied to the manner in which you can perform that truth towards others, directly tied to the manner in which you are bound to and by others. That the ultimate fantasy, the ultimate illusion is thereby precisely that you could be a subject unto yourself, that you could be unconditioned by others, that you could live in a vacuum, in a bubble of authentic experience. Of course, the word experience already applies that you are experiencing something created by others or something that you have enjoyed with others. And so authenticity, which emerges seemingly as the starting point of the self, thereby emerges as a kind of fantasy, as a necessity, as something that which we would like to reach because we feel inauthentic, because we realize that authenticity is already broken from within. It is preconditioned by others. And if you will, you might even argue that authenticity is the cultural touchstone of our time, that in order to be successful, whether in business or education, you have to learn to perform authenticity. There's this beautiful insight that I can share with you, a tip, if you will, about being on camera, because I teach my classes on camera. It took me a very long time to realize that the advice that people give you when they say just be yourself on camera is perhaps the worst advice you could possibly give somebody. Because if you go on camera and you try to be yourself, you start overthinking what it means to be yourself, and so you are performing authenticity, whereby you look very strange. If you go to a journalist's studio and you are interviewed on camera, most people look like a deer in headlights. And yet, what I've learned is that the way to appear, quote unquote, authentic on camera is to simply look at the camera and say, everything about this is inauthentic, and I'm going to squint my eyes and look into this screen, and I'm going to simply pretend like I am talking to myself. Everybody has their own way of getting over this. Actors get on stage and they pretend that the audience is naked. I do not pretend that you are naked. I don't think that would help me whatsoever. We have to find ways of communicating with others. Now, not to be too self-conscious, but you should probably know that when I teach these classes, what I see in front of me are two screens, and one of them, and both of them have my own face talking back at me. That is a distinctly inauthentic experience. Hence also why I ask you and I prompt you at the beginning of these classes to tell me where you're joining me from so that I can try to keep that in mind, that I can try to visualize the other. There's a great quote from the leader of the Mercedes team in Formula One, Toto Wolff, who said that he asked his engineers to find a photograph of their other for another team. So if let's say that you're a mechanic, you would find a photograph of a mechanic working for another team. And he said that every morning he wanted his mechanics to look at that photograph and tell himself, this is the person I'm trying to beat. Here we have again this problem of like an alienating, de-individualized machine, which is the machine of working on a supercar, on a Formula One race. And in order to make people feel invested, they have to be invested in competing against an imaginary other. And what's important here is that the other person, even though they are real, there is a real mechanic working on the other car, the relationship of the mechanic towards their adversary is thereby imaginary, is thereby not real. That the authentic experience of competition thereby emerges by means of an imaginary supplement, in other words, a symptomatic supplement. And this is also why you see, for example, within manga, this whole idea about friends who are also rivals. The idea being that the best kind of friend is somebody who pushes you to try to outcompete yourself by means of trying to compete with them. That you have to find people in your life who push you to the limit in that way. Again, we have here an imaginary attachment to an other. My friend is also my enemy, my friend is also my adversary, and thereby my friend helps me unlock my inner self. We're back at the Sartrean existentialist problem, which is how do you create yourself if the idea of self is tied to others? And this means that BeReal, the app, is strictly speaking symptomatic. Now, the word symptomatic is something that you can link back to Lacanian psychoanalysis or the Marxist critique of capitalism. And to put that in a nutshell, the Lacanian idea of symptom, or for Lacan, symptôme, is thereby an excessive, seemingly immaterial third substance that arises where it should not be. Now that's incredibly abstract, but the best way to think about it is to think about what Lacan calls surplus enjoyment. Think about discipline, for example. Think about how when you're doing something really painful, something really hard, you find a weird pleasure in this pain. This is also why Lacan argues that masochism is actually at the center of what it means to be alive. Lacan says that even if you became an ascetic and you tried to deny the body, you would simply become denial embodied. That the one thing we cannot escape is enjoyment, that enjoyment arises in the weirdest and strangest of positions, that we can be in pain and yet somehow derive satisfaction from it, that human beings are not wired to experience happiness or joy directly, that it is incredibly difficult, perhaps even impossible, to be in the moment. And surplus enjoyment for Lacan is the excessive element of enjoyment that we find beyond the enjoyment principle itself. I'll give you an example. Let's say that you are working on a deadline and you really don't want to be working that hard. It's too late. You're working on an essay and it has to be done. And yet somehow at around midnight, when you're in the flow and the world has gone quiet and you're simply working on your paper, you're crushing it, you're listening to music, somehow you feel happy. You feel happier in your flow because you're stressed. And this is a situation where you are disciplining yourself. You're not going to bed, you're not sleeping, maybe you're not eating, you're doing something that you might not want to be doing. And yet by means of doing it, you find a certain satisfaction. This is the central principle of all discipline. Discipline, strictly speaking, means that you are denying yourself something that you would otherwise want, that you are putting temporary enjoyment on hold on behalf of delayed satisfaction or gratification. It's also why instant gratification is one of the great ills of our time, that there are so many ways in which we can trigger our brain into feeling instantly gratified that it becomes increasingly insurmountable to actually find a way to be properly content or properly gratified. That no matter how many hits of serotonin you get from your phone, it's very difficult to take a step back and to say, I feel like I've accomplished something. And so the whole idea of discipline is to say, I'm going to do something to discipline myself, to put my own subjective agency on hold on behalf of a greater principle. To say, I'm going to go to the gym even though I don't feel like it. To say, I'm going to work out or read or study or paint or do something that I don't want to do because I know that by means of doing it, I will somehow mysteriously, miraculously feel better afterwards. And within the Lacanian and Hegelian and Zizek'ian framework, discipline thereby contains the truth of what it means to be alive. Namely that we struggle to find direct enjoyment of existence as such, that we find satisfaction and fulfillment when we put aside the things that we actually want. That discipline forces us into a position where we feel happy not because we achieved what we wanted, we feel happy because we've achieved some form of mastery over ourselves. And what's so interesting, if you go back to Hegel, for example, and Hegel's emphasis on discipline, is that absolute discipline for Hegel, like for example, being in the army or being in a family where your parent tells you exactly what to do, or having a nanny, or having like some order, some symbolic order that decides for you, is thereby the highest form of bliss. That desubjectivization paradoxically becomes the way in which we feel most intimately attached to our subjectivity. Think about when you're a child, for example, how when you're a child, you briefly, if you're lucky, you briefly feel like your parents know everything, like they have the solution to all your problems, that you can go to your parents and that they're strictly speaking a kind of gods, that you don't need to hear from other people as long as your parents decide. If your parents decide what is good or bad, if your parents know, essentially. And this idea of a knowing subject, or what Lacan calls the one who is supposed to know, is the ultimate form of happiness. It's the happiness of slavery, right? It's saying, I don't have to decide for myself. I don't have to do for myself. I can simply trust and rely on a being who is wholly good. And of course, no being exists who is wholly good. And part of what it means to become an adult and to learn to be your own person and your own authentic subject is thereby precisely to realize the cracks within your parents' appearance, to realize that they will cover, that they will lie, that they will sometimes say something that isn't true, that they'll manipulate, that they make mistakes, that your parents are in fact real human beings. It's one of the most traumatic realizations that we continue to grapple with all of our life, is that the people we thought to be flawless and imperfect are in fact perfect. That the closest we can get to loving our parents as we loved them when we were a child is to consider them imperfectly perfect. That what it means to be an adult is simply to realize that your parent is a human being. and that you can love them for it because you know that they tried, but you can't expect them to be perfect. In fact, that would be a form of psychotic foreclosure. Psychotic foreclosure for Lacan is when you over-identify with the absolute, when you consider the absolute to be absolute. In other words, if you consider your parent to in fact be God, to in fact be the absolute arbiter of that which is good. And so in a weird way, the foundation for our own existence as an autonomous individual subject is resisting the parent, as saying, I am differentiated from you. I can judge when I agree with you and when I don't. And yet the price that we pay for this individuality of this own authentic expression apropos our parent is pain. The pain of losing the idea of the parent as the absolute. And this is a central premise within existentialism, but also within psychoanalysis, that this pain is constitutive, that this feeling out of joint with yourself, not knowing who to trust or what to follow or what to read, or simply to feel not at ease in your own body, is thereby perhaps the most authentic expression of what it means to be alive. That over the horizon lies the fantasy of a life that feels in time, in joint, in the moment. And so in the same way that our emphasis today on being in the moment is strictly speaking symptomatic to the fact that we all feel out of the moment, that we feel out of joint, that we feel like we've become prey and hostage to our phones, in the same manner, BeReal is symptomatic to the fact that we don't understand anymore what it means to have authentic expression. Now, I want to caution here that the big danger would thereby be precisely to argue that you have to be authentic. And what's interesting here, and this is what Marx would have called bourgeois ideology. So bourgeois ideology for Marx, if you want a very clear definition of it, is simply something that disavows a certain innate antagonism by pretending there is none. For example, Zizek always cautions against the idea of loving humanity. Think about how like Elon Musk, when he took over Twitter, said that he was doing it for the love of humanity. Whenever you are arguing on behalf of the greater good, that is where you enter the realm of evil. Hegel's theory of evil, as I mentioned before, is simply to say the person who identifies on behalf of the absolute good. And thereby what happens is that so I'm going back to bourgeois ideology, bourgeois ideology is thereby that which masks an internal division by suggesting that there is none, emphasizing the universal. Another example, in today's world, everything that is commodified is sold to you as being democratized. For example, now everybody can have access to education if you buy this course. Now everybody can have access to investment if you join Robinhood. The idea that commodification equals democratization, in other words, the idea that if you can pay for something, it is thereby somehow equalized, is bourgeois ideology at its most potent. You take something, which is the marker of inequality, namely, do you have access to monetary goods to purchase an advanced skill, and then you sell that as being democratized. You sell it as now everybody has access to it. And the interesting and slightly ironic thing is that Marx himself started out by saying that money was thereby a great unifier, a great equalizer. Because on the face of it, if you have money, it doesn't matter if you're a lord or if you're a serf, you can buy the same things. Like, it doesn't matter what the status of your birth is, you can still go out and buy the same suit. And so money and the idea of the commodity form presents itself, the idea of the market presents itself as a great unifier, as a great equalizer. And Marx is very excited about this. And yet this is precisely where Marx ends up with the critique of bourgeois ideology, because Marx says, yes, money is supposed to be the great equalizer. Money is supposed to get rid of the inequality of the master-serf, the master-bondage relationship, by which the status that you were born into has an impact on the way in which you can live. And yet, Marx argues that this inequality between the master and the serf is sustained within capitalism, except now it is disavowed. In other words, the inequality persists, except the new name of inequality becomes equality. That since everybody can now make money, we pretend like everybody has equal opportunity, which patently they do not. And thereby bourgeois ideology is simply the premise that an inequality persists and is presented to you in its seeming opposite form. And the way in which we see that today would be, for example, how we talk about the commodification of access as the democratization of access. And it's really important that you understand this process. For example, when we go back to the acquisition of Twitter and the idea that Twitter, as Elon Musk and some of his followers have said, should be like this public platform whereby the best ideas rise to the top in some proto-libertarian argument. First of all, an idea cannot by its nature be normative. If an idea rises to the top, then it means that this idea has already succumbed to the market logic by which ideas can be ranked normatively according to an algorithm. which means that the market dictates which idea is best, rather than the ideas dictating the market. And so retroactively, the best idea will have been determined by the market, which will have been collectively created through participation in the algorithm. Thereby, we don't actually assess the best idea. We will be told what the best idea is once it has already happened. And here we find, in perhaps the most vulgar form, another way of talking about the Hegelian idea that the owl of Minerva always flies at dusk, that knowledge emerges too late, that we cannot know authenticity to begin with. We cannot know what is best to begin with. We are told retroactively what is best. And this problem, which is a problem that we're going to face within post-humanism, in other words, the manner in which we become increasingly detached from what it means to be linked to this flesh bag, is precisely, are we acting authentically, or are we being prompted by the algorithm? Is an idea good, or has the market decided that it is the most marketable option? Are we in fact free, or do we have more access to commodification of the experience of liberty? And that boundary is going to keep changing, and it's so important that you remain aware of it. And so one of the ways in which we can think about it is the idea of the symptom. It's the idea of bourgeois ideology. It's the idea of something being masked by its perceived opposite. Hence, BeReal presents itself as the injunction and the imperative to be authentic, and yet it provides you with what is seemingly the most inauthentic way of participating possible, which is simply to be prompted into action by an algorithm. And I want to push back, though, because this is not necessarily a bad thing, because remember, I started by introducing the idea that freedom an sich, that authenticity an sich, is itself the fantasy that is packaged to you, that perhaps rather than chasing the tail of authenticity, we should simply embrace the fact that authenticity is symptomatic, that authenticity emerges too late, that in the same way that Hegel argued that paradise only emerged after the fall, in other words, that the longing for Eden was created in the mind of man once he had already left Eden, perhaps the idea of authenticity emerges only too late, that it is a third excessive feature, that we long for authenticity because we know that authenticity can no longer be reached. And so rather than arguing that we have fallen from the authentic, we should argue that the authentic was never there, that the authentic is a symptomatic excess that is suggested to us because we are yearning for a reunification with an a priori substance. That authenticity, like the soul, is something which we may feel, and yet which we probably do not have. Now, I want to link this to a couple more political arguments that we can extrapolate from this. One of them, of course, is that the more we participate on social media, the more we are prompted to see authenticity as being the benchmark of high-value participation. In other words, the more that we realize that if you want to commodify yourself on the internet, if you want to sell something, you thereby have to become your own brand. You have to sell the idea of authentic participation, whether it is with your followers or with your community. In other words, the extent to which you cater towards parasocial relationships. This means that authenticity becomes a lucrative proposition. In other words, that in the incentive structure of the creator economy, authenticity becomes a desirable substance. This means that the better that you are at performing authenticity, the more likely you are to actually be able to thrive in an authentic, financially viable manner. Those people who are seemingly lacking in authenticity are thereby told that they're at the bottom of the financial ladder and cannot be rewarded and end up working in alienated jobs. We see this increasingly with Gen Z, who want to work as quote-unquote influencers and content creators, who realize that the pathway towards an inauthentic, alienated existence is precisely not to learn how to perform learn to perform authenticity on the internet. That the proposition that young people are faced with is either I work a job that is relatively meaningless to me and that makes me feel alienated from myself, or I learn to perform authenticity online and thereby become in touch with a more commodifiable, financially viable entity, namely the product and the brand of myself. And for all the moralists who have argued, of course, that branding and the idea of turning yourself into a brand is the ultimate act of capitalist dehumanization, the problem is a little bit more complicated than that. After all, what if within this disciplining online we find true enjoyment, true surplus enjoyment? One of my favorite memes is the character Squidward, who is looking at his phone at night or at something, and he says, "This is some great content." Increasingly, people follow their own content in order to feel real. That rather than touching grass, people will touch their phone. And I think we cannot underestimate the extent to which people's genuine sense of selfhood is thereby tied in to the persona that they play online. And the ultimate new age trap has always been to argue that there is an authentic self, that if we meditate long enough and if we detach from the online world, if we spend enough time grounded in reality, that we will feel more in touch with ourselves. And yet fundamentally, as good as this may be for your mental health to detach and detox and unwind, it's a trap to think that there is an authentic core to us. It's one of Slavoj Žižek's most persistent arguments that authenticity is a lie, that the idea that you should be more authentic is precisely a commodity that is sold to you. And so it's not that we have lost our authentic selves by commodifying ourselves on the internet, it's almost the other way around. It's that the commodification of authenticity emerges precisely because we feel lost and adrift within the internet. It's also why I'm a very big believer in creating communities online where people enjoy and share the same kind of things that you find enriching and stimulating. That it is good to meet other people online. And if that feels somehow inauthentic, then that is because you don't see those people face to face, because you have a much more direct and instantaneous reaction with all those people. But it doesn't make it less authentic. It simply makes it different. It's also why the performance of authenticity that we see on Instagram today, where people try to be real, is itself an almost outdated form of participation. Remember, the trajectory of Instagram went from I am perfect to I am flawed. And this is true for all heroes. We don't want our heroes to be perfect. We want them to be flawed. This is a great theory that Hank Green has about political participation and why we vote for bad people. Hank Green says that the problem is that people have reputations, and when you participate online, you increasingly create a reputation, i.e. a brand. And so everything that you do has to be in line with that reputation. For example, if your reputation is to be wholesome, then the only thing you could do to undermine your reputation would be to say something very hateful. However, if your brand is hate, if your brand is spewing invective, then the only thing that you could do to undermine your credibility would be to post something wholesome. We see this, for example, with Donald Trump, or even what's happening with Kanye West. If your brand is to be invecting against others, the only thing that you could do to disappoint your followers would be to suddenly turn around and say, I'm sorry, I regret this. And so what happens is that in this performance of authenticity, we end up in a very dangerous situation whereby some people tend to think that the most outrageous characters, the most inflammatory participants in the online economy, are thereby the most authentic. And we see this over and over, even across history before the dawn of social media, that people would vote for reactionary leaders and they would say, I vote for them because they are the most authentic, because they speak to me, because I feel like I could have a beer with them. Again, we see the problem of authenticity, that the problem of authenticity can very quickly be that you dumb down to a universal level where everybody understands you, that if you are communicating with millions of people online, in order to avoid ever finding one person who misunderstands you, you have to create a universal narrative by which you can never be misunderstood. I saw a very influential, how to get rich quick type creator called Alex Hormozi post a tweet where he said that the best way to be successful online is to consider that your followers are all third graders. And it's like, if you collectively underestimate the intelligence of your audience and you flatter them and you affirm them and you try to please them and you speak in the most universal language possible, you will thereby reach a lot of people. And yet this performance of authenticity is thereby deeply alienating, deeply inauthentic, has nothing to do with who you really are. And so the problem of authenticity remains that on the one hand, we have to perform authenticity, and yet authenticity in its performance is thereby deeply inauthentic. Now, I hate to say this, we're running out of time. I was going to do a whole bit on Jordan Peterson and the moralization of politics and the politics of sexuality and postmodernism, which I will try to do in my Q&A afterwards. I'm going to record a Q&A in about 15 minutes on Discord. So I'm going to try to get to that, I promise, because I'm trying to do a lot of topics here. And so the problem of authenticity thereby presents itself that we are yearning for authenticity, that we are looking for the authentic. And yet, usually when we see authenticity, our alarms should go off. That if we're being told by someone that somebody is authentic, they are usually performing authenticity. And yet then we should be aware that there is no such thing as authentic authenticity. That in a sense, the very idea of authenticity is inauthentic. That it is strictly speaking symptomatic and ideological, that authenticity has become the new commodity on the internet. That perhaps the new way of being fake is simply to be real. And that it's important to note that this is not a surprise. People already know this. Nobody really genuinely believes that people are being real online. Thereby, being real becomes a symptomatic, excessive form of surplus enjoyment, where it's like we've all realized that it's fake, and now we want to enjoy pretending like we are real. We want to be fooled. And because we consume our own content, because we understand who we are by means of our self-expression on the internet, because like it or not, the internet is a powerful tool for self-expression, we thereby emphasize the idea of being real. And yet there's a horrific core to the idea of authenticity. Nobody should be authentic. Nobody should be yelling at other people because they're mad. Nobody should be mean and abusive because they disagree with somebody. That perhaps inauthenticity is precisely the founding civilizational gesture. That if we embrace inauthenticity, we can actually reach our higher selves. It's a Kantian idea where Kant says that instead of saying that you are acting authentically, you should act inauthentically. Because if we act inauthentically together, we can actually reach a higher substance of life. That at its heart, I want to be very clear here, the idea of authenticity has always been fascist. The idea of an authentic living space, the idea of authentic bloodlines, the idea of authentic experience of life, and that supposedly secret cabals of different ethnicities are undermining the authentic experience of family values and social relations. Authenticity and the drive for authenticity is a deeply conservative sentiment that masks an underlying fascist reality. And that thereby the insistence on the authentic follows the same pattern as the insistence on fighting on the behalf of the absolute good. And thereby my argument would be that we should embrace the inauthentic, that we should stretch the boundaries of what we think authentic existence is, that the most emancipatory gesture is to be liberated from the yoke of wanting to be real. And yet, you can say, Julian, why do you participate in the app BeReal? The reason I participate in BeReal is because it is deeply inauthentic, because it is the ultimate form of surplus enjoyment. Why? Surplus enjoyment is the enjoyment that I get beyond the idea of enjoyment itself. In other words, surplus enjoyment is the enjoyment of discipline, as I talked about before in this live stream. And so when an app tells me what to do at a certain given moment in time, this is enjoyable to me. This I like. I don't have to be the active arbiter or agent of choosing when to post or how to post. I can now make myself the passive recipient of a symbolic order that in its divine knowingness will prompt me into action. And here we have the Kantian imperative, the Kantian maxim, which is du kannst denn du sollst, which is you can because you must. When BeReal prompts me into saying you must post, I can because I must. And so BeReal enacts the ultimate surplus enjoyment that you can have on the internet today, which is not to act authentically, but precisely to revel and relish in your own inauthenticity. That BeReal is probably the least real app that you will ever find, and thereby precisely has a strange, ironic surplus enjoyment which masks as a kind of truth. That in the passive enjoyment of being the recipient of a blind algorithm that prompts us into unilateral action, we thereby feel for a brief moment like we have relinquished the burden of our own agency. And rather than finding this oppressive, I like that this points towards the truth at the heart of subjectivity and authenticity, which is that we are never less authentic than when we are trying to be real, and we are never more real than we are embracing our own inauthenticity. Thank you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching today. I appreciate you. Like I said, this is the last day that you can download my ebook introduction to Zizek and Lacan. It's about 100 pages, easy to read. It's available on my Patreon. It's going to be deleted November 1st. So if you'd like to get it, you can find it now on www.patreon.com/Julian and Julian, or click the link in bio. A very big thank you to everybody who has joined us today. You can also join us as a patron. If you're a patron, you can join us on Discord for another Q&A, which I'm going to be recording in about 15-20 minutes, in which I can talk more about the moralization of politics, Zizek's critique of postmodernism, and I also wanted to talk about Jordan Peterson. So you can find that on Discord. Simply sign up at the $5 tier. You can join us right away. Thank you guys so much. I will see you all next week. Until then, be real. Oh, okay. The Discord link on Patreon is not working. I'm going to immediately solve that as soon as I as soon as I log out. I'm gonna work on that. All right, thanks guys.